Anna Zubets-Anderson, welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you, Matt. Thanks for having me. Glad
You're
to be
very,
back. How are you?
you're very welcome. I'm doing well. How are you?
I'm doing good this Monday morning after a school run.
Happy Monday.
Yeah.
So,
So
what's the
still
deal?
still coming back from my weekend, so forgive me if I'm a little slow.
Okay, all good. What's the deal with society?
The big question, Matt.
Mhm,
Society is going society is being wild, right?
mhm,
The world is in a very weird place. A lot of disruption.
mhm,
A lot of people are bothered, stressed, scared. I don't know, many different words.
mhm.
So what do you want to talk about with respect to society?
So, I'm thinking you have a background and experience in therapy, correct?
Oh
So,
yeah,
you're
that's my
seeing
that's my new career. Yes.
It's your new career. So I feel like you have a lot of firsthand experience with hearing from people when it comes to coping, when it comes to even trauma, when it comes to just day to day, even day to day functioning. So, kind of with that front row seat, what's maybe a theme that you're hearing from people that kind of ties into the bigger picture of society and culture? Maybe not just their personal history or their family history, but kind of like real time what people are grappling with in terms of just being out there in the world from your kind of front row seat. Any type of themes or things that you're seeing that tie into society and culture in your sessions.
I mean, I guess generally speaking, right? I mean, so many people are showing up with anxiety and just effects of stress. I mean, that's like an ever-present reality um, for most of us, I think. Just a lot of social stressors people are under and facing a lot of uncertainty in the future, a lot of changes,
Mhm.
financial pressures, right, that affect relationships, so then couples have issues, so it's just a lot of knock-on effects.
Mhm.
But I guess like more generally, I'm thinking, right? What comes to mind is this podcast I listened to a little bit earlier by Gabor Mate. And he was saying how so I'm also reading a book by him called, what is it called? The Myth of Normal, right? So so he has this idea, which is not really new, but he articulates it really well, that like our physical and mental well-being is clearly interconnected with each other, but also all that is very much connected to the culture and society that we live in, that you can't divorce one from another, right? So like a lot of the mental health issues that we have and physical illnesses that we have are actually tied to the culture that we're living in. And a lot of things that we accept as normal are actually not normal, not good for us. And one of the things he was saying that really resonated with me in my work now as a therapist is that it's more common to be traumatized than not in our society. You know what I mean? Like we kind of think of trauma as something that belongs to this like group of people, like traumatized people have traumatic histories. And he's saying, well, it would be an outlier not to be traumatized. We live in a kind of culture and a kind of society where a lot of us are traumatized. There are a lot of traumas and there are a lot of stressors and there are a lot of things that we think are normal that are actually not to a human animal, and that leaves us in a state of mental distress.
Mhm.
Does that make sense?
It does. And I have a quote that comes to mind, and I'm not going to give proper attribution because I don't remember who it's from, but I'll put it in the show notes after in the comment section. But I think it's from Krishmarti is the last name of the person that gave the
Uh-huh.
quote.
Yeah, yeah,
Or
yeah.
is that the Krishmarti? So there's no sign of well-being to be well adjusted to a profoundly sick society. Now that's
Yeah,
kind of
yeah,
a
yeah. I
strong,
know
real
that
quote.
quote, and that's a
That
really
quote.
good
So
one.
that kind of
Yeah.
comes to mind here of that. So when you say trauma, what do you mean by trauma?
So trauma would be some kind of inner experience, right? Trauma is not so much an outer event. Obviously, outer event leads to trauma, but trauma is an inner experience in the psyche that results in a change such that your true self is not able to come through as it otherwise would. That's Anna's definition. It's not an official definition, right? It's like a scar tissue of some sort. Something happened, and whatever happened, the way you experienced it on the inside of you and your own psyche resulted in like adaptations inside, thought forms and so on that were adaptive in the moment, like they allowed you to get through that event, but at the same time, they had a lasting impact on your psyche, where from that point forward, your psyche, in a way, was prevented from developing to its full potential.
Hmm.
That would be my definition of trauma,
Okay.
right? It's kind of something that happened on the inside that sort of derailed you, right? So, like the way you would flourish otherwise, it's either like halted or maybe slowed down or maybe changed in some way, and the whole idea is to go back and uncover that scar tissue and think through or feel through those adaptations so that then you can show up in the world as full you.
So what I'm thinking there is that it gets in the way of self-actualization or even just development and growth because there's a block, right? Because of the scar tissue, or there needs to be some
Yeah.
healing and development to then, I guess, grapple with and deal with the trauma. So what's a common example of trauma?
Well, I'm gonna go ahead and like use Gabor Mate's example because it's just so fresh of mind and it's in his book, right? So it's like public information, so I don't have to think think through, examples where people might not want me to share that, right? But his example is, let's see, he grew up in Hungary, like he was born in Hungary, and I think I'm getting that right. But it was, his family was Jewish, and they were facing persecution. And his mother, when he was born and he was an infant, his mother was fearing for her life, and she had to give him up for a time so that he could be taken to safety with other family members. So there was that very early experience for him as an infant that he was abandoned by his mother. As an infant, of course, he doesn't understand that his mother was trying to, protect him, save him, give him the best chance of survival. An infant just knows that his mother disappeared. And so that created an attachment wound that then, affected him for the rest of his life, the way he showed up in relationships and career, the way, he approached work and people and all that. So, that would be a really good example. So this is no longer about Gabor Mate, but just in general. So if a baby experiences the loss of a mother, like if I'm thinking through it, right, like how might it affect someone? Um, probably very deeply in that psyche, there is lodged like a fundamental fear of closeness. If I get too close to you, if I love you too much, you might leave.
Mm-hmm.
You might abandon me. So maybe it's better off if I'm alone. Maybe I'm better off if I'm independent. Maybe I'm better off if I never get too close to anyone, and then kind of knock-on effects on that. That's the other thing with traumas, right? They tend to like spirals, they keep building upon themselves, like it impacts different layers of life and it builds out. So, knock-on effect might be if somebody's afraid to get close to people, right? Somehow, as a social animal, they got to feel safe in the society. So if they're afraid to get close to people and they're afraid to trust people, well, how do they get safe? Well, very often then the substitute is going to be work, right? If I work really hard, if I'm excellent at what I do, if I'm beyond reproach, then I'm going to be safe. Or maybe for somebody else, it might be like power. If I accumulate a bunch of money and a bunch of power, then I'll be safe, even though I don't trust people. And then you get to middle age, right? And your whole life is already built up. The kind of relationships that you have, the kind of jobs that you chose, the kind of choices, it might all be to heavy extent informed by that early trauma
Okay.
that you might not even remember.
Right. And I'm thinking from a societal standpoint, if there are many traumatized people, that will affect the way they interact with others, which sometimes can be unhealthy, right? If they're not just isolated, but if there's sometimes a violent or aggressive approach towards others because of their trauma, where they then put their trauma onto other people in terms of day-to-day interaction or unhealthy interaction. that they can hurt others because they're not fully healed themselves, right? Or they have some anger issues. And I don't have a background in therapy, but I'm just kind of speculating here
Yeah, it's all just
that
kind of, so yeah, so
yeah,
like
that people are now showing up in sometimes a traumatized way, and that can then have a bigger effect on society. For example, you mentioned power, right? People who want power, maybe over others, right? Or if they're especially money motivated, it can result in greed and aggression of taking from others, right? Or manipulation. So I'm just thinking of the trauma can really have a broader effect societally. If people are mentally unwell or emotionally unwell, that then affects others and has that ripple effect. And it kind of then is under the surface, right? It's not always in the necessarily in the news or in the media. It's always there. And I think that's kind of one of the big 800-pound elephants in the room these days is mental health, right? A lot of times people say, oh, we need to address this, but it's never quite addressed. It's still got some stigma to it, and that leads to societal problems. Many unhealthy people that are affecting other health, and then they cause trauma on others because it's never quite dealt with. It's never, and the trauma, as you said, gets in the way of development and growth. That people kind of stuck, and it causes bigger problems in families and workplaces when you have power hungry people or you have people that are angry and then they hurt others who then in turn then hurt other people, and it's just not healthy. So I'm thinking of kind of this under the surface, never quite addressed. And I'll throw it back to you, but I had one other comment about sometimes that stigma where, oh, it's a sign of weakness to address trauma. You just have to bully your way through it, fight your way through it, right? It's a sign of weakness, which some people don't even go into therapy or
right.
any type of way to heal. It's kind of just compartmentalized, and they want to be perceived as weak for addressing any injuries they have to their brain or to their heart or whatever else. So I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, all really good points, right? I mean, like I'm gonna start with the last thing you said, like people who don't address it because they want to be strong and power through, right? I mean, they might end up being, like strong in the sense of survival, right? They might adapt in order to survive, but then they're living out of that scar tissue and that affects others. So, for example, if somebody never addressed their wounds and therefore, they don't trust anyone, they don't really get close to people, and therefore they substitute that, you know, human closeness with power. Let's say, power becomes a substitute for love. That's a pretty common one, right? Like somebody deep down doesn't think they're lovable, doesn't think people can love them, so they substitute power for love. Well, if somebody is like that, they might think they're being strong because they're accumulating power. They're good at survival, right? Um, they don't feel because maybe in positions of power, sometimes feeling is inconvenient. So they live out of that scar tissue. They think they're fine. They think they're an example of resilience. They think they're an example of overcoming hard things or whatever. Doesn't matter that this happened to me when I was a baby because look at me, I'm so successful. And they live that life out of a scar tissue, but there is like a fundamental part of them that remains undeveloped. And that's the part that feels and can connect to other human beings.
Mhm.
Well, and now that person becomes a person in a position of power who is really a big baby on the inside, not to point fingers, but I think we all know who I'm talking about. And there are plenty of examples of that. And then that kind of person in a position of great power, ends up, you know, making great havoc on the world, right? And then that social trauma perpetuates.
Mhm.
So then you have these people in positions of power who are really, you know,
Mhm.
trying to find a good way of saying it, but like emotionally not fully developed,
Mhm.
right? And so then they make choices out of that place, and their choices, because they're so powerful, impacts great numbers of people.
Mhm.
Um, Narcissistic personality disorder would be like a really good example. And then they may make choices in those positions of power that hurt a lot of people, like you said,
Mhm.
and perpetuate social trauma forward.
Mhm.
I mean, ultimately, most traumas that you encounter in people can be traced to some kind of social event, right? Like the example that I started with, it was an attachment trauma, but it started out with the mother being persecuted. Well, it's the same with poverty. It's the same with any kind of condition where people have to live in fear. Um, Political instability, wars, environmental disasters, right? Like anything like that can create events where people experience traumatic events. Children experience trauma that they are not like developmentally ready to adapt to, and then it creates lasting effects into the next generation. Um, yeah, it kind of like, it speaks to interconnectedness of all of us,
Mhm.
so when we don't heal, we impact great numbers of people. We might not even be aware of how many, and that in turn has impact on the society for the future generations. And then that society, if it's unhealthy, creates unhealthy people, and on we go.
Mhm.
And so the only way it really changes, I mean, yeah, policy matters and politics matters. But ultimately it's like, if you think about it from the starting from the roots, right? Like if everybody took ownership of their own healing,
Mhm.
I feel like it wouldn't take long to have a healthy society.
Interesting. I'd love to continue with this dichotomy of love and power, right? And maybe stick with the power aspect of whether it's in corporations, whether it's in governments, or even in families, people who are substituting. And sometimes there's a balance there, right? But let's go more to the extreme of people who are really power hungry, and that's really filling their void of not being able to think they're unlovable, or there's issues, traumatic issues from childhood or whatever other point in life we have. So I'd love to run with this power idea, right? And
Mhm.
governments, not just in the United States, but all around the world, right? All nations and all corporations. I love so this power, right? So what starts to happen? Because I think a lot of when you have people who are striving for that and have some type of narcissism or whatever disorders might be at play there, that then can wreak havoc on people around them, and then it has ripple effects. So, talk to me a little bit about what happens there when somebody feels unlovable, or there's a traumatic social event that leads them to then strive for power as a substitute.
Well, I mean, ultimately, like, we're all social animals at the very baseline. Like, just going back to the very beginning, like, we survive in packs,
Mhm.
right? Like, human babies, because of their big brains, are born earlier, relatively speaking, compared to other animals, meaning like our babies are born where they can't thrive on their own for a very long time. So it requires mother who can stay by the baby and care for the baby, which requires a whole social pack to protect the whole system. So like we work in packs. We don't survive on our own. Despite any illusion anybody might be having that they're surviving on their own, nobody is surviving on their own. And deep down, our nervous system knows it. Our nervous system knows that if you put me out on an iceberg and pushed me out into the Arctic waters, there is no way I can survive on my own,
Mhm.
right? That's what nervous system knows. That's a human nervous system. We need a pack.
Mhm.
So if deep down you think that the pack might abandon you,
Mhm.
what would your nervous system want to feel safe?
Mhm.
There are going to be different adaptations for different people, but like logically speaking, like what would you do, right? Like somebody might say, okay, like if I have control over other people,
Mhm.
then they won't put me out on the iceberg. I'll be fine. I'll have my pack if I control the goddamn pack.
Mhm.
If I can accumulate a whole bunch of resources, right? And I hoard those resources, then the pack can't abandon me because they need my resources.
Mhm.
Or maybe if I like become like a fawn, right? Like I find the powerful members of the pack and I please them and I do anything that it takes to please them, then maybe I'm safe that way. You know what I mean? So it's like it's kind of like if you don't trust human relationships that are based on
Mhm.
connection and mutual caring and all those things, then you're gonna have to somehow feel safe via power structures.
Mhm.
And if you kind of blow it up to modern day in the huge social structures that we have, right? Like maybe, one strategy to feel safe is to like really attach yourself to some kind of social power system, like, oh, if I'm a really like good corporate employee that
Mhm.
nobody can never let go of, nobody can never lay off, and I will do anything to be that, to be a really good corporate widget, and my whole life becomes about that, maybe then I'm safe.
Mhm.
Right? People have different strategies, or if I just have more and more money, tons and tons of money, trust funds, whatever, the more money I have, the more safe I feel because nobody can abandon me then.
Mhm.
Or I have a, political role, whatever position where I can like make decisions that impact a bunch of people, then I'll be okay. You know? Does that answer your question?
Totally. And I was thinking something similar about when you're saying I might be abandoned by the pack. I might be on that iceberg. That was the first thought I had. Oh, well, take control, right?
Yeah, 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 yeah,
That's a
yeah.
potential solution. Take
Yeah.
charge, right?
Mhm.
And that will then um, adapt so don't end up abandoned or on the iceberg, right? So then it comes to take control, and then it's also kind of people who attach themselves to corporations or certain leaders. It's also kind of a take charge, but of their own well-being. Or this is the way I'm going to survive. So let me take charge of my own life. Let me take charge and this is the way I survive by attaching, right, or following. So yeah, I would love to continue with control and power and where that leads, right? Because I think there are, I'll bring up governments, right? I feel like a lot of good, decent, everyday people don't want to run for office, right? Because of the jungle that is. So it attracts people who strive for control and power, frankly, over others, right? Which then,
100%.
yeah. So I mean, in the political world for sure, but also in corporations, you have people sometimes with the quote unquote strongest personality, right? The more dominant personalities that take charge, even though they're not necessarily the best decision makers or necessarily looking out for the pack. It's just their personality at that point, striving for control and power, which then affects everybody else. So I guess my question is going to be around. You said earlier, like if there's a lot, what I heard earlier is a lot of individuals potential who are not accountable for to themselves for their own well-being, and they don't deal with this trauma for whatever reason because it's a sign of
Yeah.
weakness, or maybe they're just ignorant to it, frankly, right? Or just fear of dealing with it. Those monsters under the bed can be quite scary. So I would almost flip it that it's actually courageous to deal with the trauma
100%.
rather
Yeah.
than to just ignore it or quote unquote bully your way through it, but to confront that. If there's if there's fear there, then there's courage to overcome it. So I just wanted to put that out there first as like a flip where maybe that's a sign a sign of
That's
courage to
that's a
deal with
re
trauma, and a lot of
yeah,
people
that's a
don't do
that's
that, right? And then I just want to throw out one more thing about it's a Jordan Peterson concept. I don't know if it's from his book or from his podcast, but it was before you're the CEO of a corporation or before you're the president of a country, like how about you become the CEO of your own life, right? And the president of your own life.
like, yeah,
And,
take care of your own
yeah,
house
take
first,
care.
right?
Start
Yeah.
with that,
Yeah, yeah.
and then
Like make sure
maybe
make
your
sure you're
household.
actually okay on the inside before you go around other people. Yes. And,
Right.
and people don't do that.
Right, exactly. And that's where
Yeah.
leadership of maybe even a household, but like or and maybe a community become mayor. But there's that there's that, oh, I want to have control. But how about be the CEO of your own life first and president
Yeah.
of your own maybe family and be a leader and then take a but this kind of void, right? Or this lack of feeling lovable or feeling you're going to be abandoned, then it the action becomes run for higher office or become the boss of the group and tell other people what to do, even though it's maybe not in people's best interest, but it's filling that emotional void. So I'll throw it back to you, but those are my kind of two comments. One about the courage it takes to deal with trauma, and then also how about take control of your own life and well-being before you start telling other people what to do or diagnosing things on a bigger scale, right? Or thinking you have all the answers or solutions. Maybe you don't. Maybe deal with yourself first before you become a leader.
Yeah, I mean, those are really good points. Like, I agree with all of that, and I just want to like reflect on a couple of things. Like, one, I think you said something along the lines of like, who chooses, to chase those positions of power? Because like, who wants? What did you call it, monkey business? Who wants to do that? Like whole circus, right? And like that's a really good point, right? There is a view that says like our power systems are going to reflect the unhealthiest of us. Because what happens is that, that's a good question, right? If you're thinking about the kind of sacrifice that it takes to climb to the top,
Mhm.
sacrifice in personal mental and physical health very often. People make choices where they don't take care of themselves really to commit the time and the effort necessary to climb to the top.
Mhm.
Very often they give up relationships with their loved ones, with their children, to climb to the top. So like what does it take to make the choices to sacrifice all those other parts of life
Mhm.
just to get that position of power, right? The kind of place you have to come from. And I don't want to like paint it with such a broad brush to say that anybody who's in a position of power is unhealthy. That's not true either. Some people are just maybe that talented or maybe they got that lucky or whatever happened, right? But I think if we go to powerful positions, we're going to find it disproportionately a lot of those people are traumatized.
Mhm.
And that's how they make those choices to make those sacrifices to climb to the top, to have that much power because they had to, they needed to. That's what their nervous system needed to feel safe, and so then you wind up with that kind of the society that's basically getting shaped by those kinds of people, so it's kind of like almost ironic, or I don't know if that's the right word, that like our societies end up being shaped by those of us who are most traumatized.
Mhm.
Which then brings me to your next point about what courage it takes to heal. That
Mhm.
is absolute 100% true. Like it's the most courageous thing to heal because by definition, to heal your traumas, you're going to have to repeatedly do things that are scary to you.
Mhm.
By definition, right? You're going to have to give up adaptation processes that felt safe for decades.
Mhm.
If the way you felt safe is to like accumulate money and power and
Mhm.
control everybody, and that's how you feel safe, and you're trying to heal, that healing process is going to require more than just sitting around thinking about what happened to you as a baby. That
Mhm.
definitely is going to be a part of it, like sitting, talking and understanding, here's what happened to the baby when I was a baby, here's why I do these things, but you can talk about it ad nauseum.
Mhm.
And that inner infrastructure might not change until you actually live differently.
Mhm.
Because like your life is going to have to bring you different experiences for your nervous system to learn something different than what you already taught it,
Mhm.
right? So if your nervous system learn I'm safe when I control all these people,
Mhm.
you can understand why you're doing that. And that's great. Excellent first step. We got to do that first. And that also takes courage, right? To look at yourself, look at your own shadows. But then beyond that, you're going to have to make different choices. And that's going to be scary as hell. Like how, make choices to live your life that's not based on controlling other people, to
Mhm.
take risk in relationships, to be vulnerable, risk rejection,
Mhm.
risk loss of control,
Mhm.
which to some people can be really, really frightening, right? So like healing process totally requires, in my opinion, way more courage
Mhm.
than climbing to the position of power. That's why you find a lot of cowards in positions of power. You know what I mean? Because healing requires a lot more courage. You have to look at your own shadows. You have to be honest with yourself. That's really hard
Mhm.
because sometimes people have to face really painful things.
Mhm.
It's really painful to look back at your life and say the choices I made, maybe would have been different if I understood.
Mhm.
Like that's a hard thing to face. You have to have courage to do that. And
Mhm.
then after that, after you understand that, you have to look at your life and say, oh my God, I have to make changes.
Mhm.
And if I live differently, if I live from my true self, I might lose my position of power.
Mhm.
And these are like real trade-offs people make when they heal. Like sometimes they have to lose things they spent lives, building in order to heal, in order to make different choices in life. It does take a lot of courage. It's a really
Mhm.
frightening process,
I
you know?
believe it.
Yeah.
So with that visual of a pack and the iceberg and the options, so one could be, all right, let me take charge of the pack, let me control the pack. Another one could be, let me attach myself to the leader of the pack or the controlling figure. I'm also thinking, tell me if I'm wrong here, but also to just then isolate and just either, I guess, either start your own pack or just stay away and become like get away from
Well,
the
that's
pack.
I mean,
Um,
continuing with like how societies, right, can create like dysfunction, in this society, the one that we have, it sort of glorifies almost like that hyper independence, and creates a lot of opportunities for people to remain isolated. I mean, you can certainly find a place say in the corporate world where you can just like sit on your hole all day. You don't even have to leave your house anymore, right? Like a lot of remote positions, you could just literally sit in front of your laptop, for, I don't know, 14 hours a day and not really interact with any other human being in any kind of authentic way. Just be like the robot, that
Mhm.
gets the work done. Yeah, I mean, and some people do that
Mhm.
because that's what feels safest.
Mhm. And thinking of could work from remotely full time, but also now you can just order groceries in too. I mean, I feel
Yeah.
like everything's pretty convenient with grocery stores or even Amazon, get the food delivered. So if you're working from home and you're getting food delivered and so on, it could become a slippery slope of then being well, and being isolated, which could be the choice. And a lot of people maybe like that very much, the privacy and the solitude. But what can that bring if that's taken a little too extreme of becoming isolated as a solution to cope?
I mean, depression comes to mind,
Mhm.
right? I mean, again, goes back to the fact that we're social animals.
Mhm.
I can't remember who said that. It might have been Jim Carrey, but I may be wrong. I feel like it was one of the famous actors. Like, depression is your soul telling that it's tired of playing the avatar you told it to play.
Mhm.
You know, so in the example that you described, the person who is that isolated, they're just being an avatar all day. And post-COVID, like in home office environment, literally a little like square on a screen,
Mhm.
you know? And
Mhm.
if that's how you live your life, and you're just being a role all day, and there is no other human being or no other human beings around to reflect who you really are or for you to be with them who you really are,
Mhm.
your soul is gonna get really damn tired of playing the avatar,
Mhm.
and it's gonna come through as depression.
Mhm.
It's just like I think that's just what's gonna happen, right? And the tricky part is that we don't always understand at a deep level why we're depressed. We just know we don't feel good.
Right.
And then very often people will go take a pill. Nothing against pills. I mean, they do help and are, um, irreplaceable in some cases, but, you know, doesn't work well as a shortcut for inner work.
Right. With that isolationism, say, and so what happens when somebody kind of leans towards isolating, but also still interacts a bit in the community or in society? Like, what, I guess, biochemistry or what when that person kind of leaves Zoom jail or they leave their residence and goes out to a social function or they're in out in space with others. What goes on like chemistry wise within their body that is like a positive when they are accepted with the pack, right? And they're interacting with other people, as you said, social animals, right? So there's like what are like the feel good chemicals that start to fire off when somebody's around others in a social way, in a healthy
A
social
really
way.
good question. I actually like I don't know off the top of my head exactly, but like serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, right, are all responsible for like our sense of well-being and are also related to like social interactions. I don't know exactly. I mean, there is a romantic connection that has chemical release of a certain kind, and then there are like friendships have chemical release too.
Mhm.
Babies, being with babies has chemical, creates chemical reactions in the body. So I don't know off the top of my head the exact chemicals at exact time, but like oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine all come to mind.
Okay.
Um, yeah, so I mean there's certainly like chemical pathways that get involved when we interact with other people. Again, goes back to us being social animals.
Mhm.
Um, and in a society that's so increasingly isolated, it's like we're animals in a really bad zoo.
Mhm.
Like if you go to a really bad zoo and you see animals who are like in cages that don't mimic their environment and they're alone, you'll see a very depressed animal.
Mhm.
And we're kind of making ourselves into that. We have our food, somebody brings the food to the door,
Mhm.
literally, grocery deliveries.
Mhm.
You
Kind of
know,
disturbing to think of that.
it is kind of
That's zoo
disturbing.
visual.
Yeah, yeah, but like, our environments resemble less and less our natural environments. The things we do resemble less and less what we're really made to do as human animals. our social structures resemble less and less the social structures we're meant to be born and grow up in and age in and die in.
Hmm.
It's like literally animals in a bad zoo.
Hmm.
And so, of course, there are going to be mental health problems.
Hmm.
And yeah,
I think.
so circling back to your first question, what do you see people coming in with? Like basically various manifestations of that,
Mhm.
depressed because they're lonely, anxious because they're stressed because they don't have enough support structures and so on and so forth.
Right. I'm thinking of those feel-good chemicals where there's oxytocin or serotonin and dopamine, et cetera. It's a way, right, for this body to communicate with itself. Maybe that nervous system that you mentioned about, hey, this is a good thing for me to be interacting with others and to connect, right? That connection, which then builds trust. But when the body's firing off, just when the body's in anxiety or there's anxiety going on, it's the body saying, hey, alert, 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 something's off, something needs to change here. Then when you're out with others in a healthy way, I feel like that was kind of a COVID thing. Once people got back out there, so this is nice to connect, right? This feel
Mhm.
something that this feels right. You have to listen to your body sometimes, right? This feels right for me to be making eye contact, for me to shake a hand, for me to laugh with somebody, or just be around others. I feel like that kind of goes to your point of social animals and being part of the pack and what happens when that's not going on. And I'll throw out technology here. So technology can be a slippery slope too, because it's with the AI companions now substituting for human companions, with maybe the misnomer of social media, right? Which can be taken to kind of throw the
We
word social in
antisocial.
front of it, and
Yeah.
like, it's like, is it really though? Is it really so? Is it really? I guess it can be construed as social, but not in terms of like a human interaction. And then again, kind of that disturbing or like a face-to-face interaction, excuse me, but or in-person interaction. Kind of kind of a little disturbing thing about that zoo. Here's your food, right? Here's your Zoom gel. Here's your, you could be social, go on the media and click, react or repost or anything. Now, I'm not saying it's all bad. Like there is
No, it's
value
not.
there, right?
But,
It's not all. I mean, there's a
yeah,
lot of
it's not
value
all bad.
there.
It's also
Yeah,
convenient and, can't
convenient.
discount the
But
advances of technology and all the diseases we can now treat that we weren't able to before. Absolutely. We
right.
survive a lot longer, all that stuff. It's
Yeah.
just, I mean, when we're talking about mental health, there are a hell of a lot of things that are not mentally healthy for us that we do
Yeah.
as if they're normal.
That's the one I was, yeah, because I don't
Yeah.
want to, there's a lot of value in technology, and
Yeah.
even in I'm sure social media, quote unquote, as it's called, or AI, I'm sure there's benefits to it. Absolutely. I'm just talking more from a mental health standpoint, where
Yeah. I
it
mean,
becomes more extreme, and then the technology could be really turned on you, and it's no longer a tool for you. You're being turned into a tool, and that's something to be cognizant of, I think, and I try to be mindful of myself.
it's almost like we as a species, traded like a whole bunch of like mental and spiritual well-being for just like longevity of life.
Mhm.
We live longer than at any other time in human history. A bunch of diseases can be treated, right? We have all that technology to make us last.
Mhm.
But maybe this is just me thinking out loud. Maybe just in order to, there's always a trade-off in the universe, right? Energy exchange.
Mhm.
Maybe we just as a species gave up a lot of like mental, emotional, spiritual well-being to get there. I don't know. Because it
So,
required us to disconnect fundamentally from our natural environment and
right.
in each other.
So, yeah, it makes me think of those, is it called uncontacted tribes in like the Amazon basin? And I always wonder what's going on there. But what's something that to that point of and maybe we've changed and sometimes for the worse, right? Just for longevity or whatever. So what's something that maybe society used to have that society doesn't really have as much anymore, that we've gotten away from, that maybe we should get back to? Because when I also think of society, I think of even just families and local communities. It doesn't always need to be the bigger social structure. It could just be in smaller groups. But in general, what have we gotten away from that you feel like maybe isn't for the best when it comes to?
A couple of things. I mean, I'm gonna partly pair Gabor Mate again, and then I'll add my own stuff. But like, uh, Gabor's like point that he brought up a couple times was like children aren't raised by a village,
Mhm.
right? I mean that's a big one, and as a mom of two, working mom of two, I second that, right? Like it's like impossible to be one woman and to give my children everything they need.
Mhm.
right? Like financial provision, emotional support, all the stuff. Like it's just and so many children in this society are being raised by single moms fearing for themselves in the social structures that don't support moms.
Mhm.
I mean, I left corporate world because it is very shitty at supporting a
Mhm.
parent, you know?
Mhm.
So yeah, so you have society that doesn't support the parent.
Mhm.
And then on top of that, generally children are being raised at best by two parents that both work. That's like better case scenario, right? But very often by single parents.
Mhm.
And they I don't know that there's a way to have all their needs met in this circumstance, you know? That's a classic example of social trauma that pervades the whole social structure.
Mhm.
That's a social trauma, that
Mhm.
affects children and their ability to attach healthily to other human beings.
Mhm.
And so that's the first one, right? I mean, it used to be that the child was raised by a village. I mean, you could send a child out down the street in a village and they could go meet their neighbors. And, the child might have a different temperament than their mother and their father. Maybe they get along better with their uncle. Maybe it's the grandfather that's the defining, figure for them.
Mhm.
Because, there's also like temperamental matches and mismatches between parents and kids.
Mhm.
And kids have a whole, like any human being, has a whole range of emotional needs. That's like it's hard for one person to meet.
Mhm.
I mean, when I was spending time as a little girl in like a Ukrainian village, like I was able to just like get lost on purpose.
Mhm.
Like just walk and go wandering around, and it was like fun to get lost. I just felt like world was my oyster, and I was exploring the village, and I could like go into like a home, into wherever I was and be like, oh yeah, I'm the granddaughter of Katerina Zubets. Could you please bring me back?
Mhm.
And they would just bring me back.
Yeah.
I mean, and there were plenty like, difficult things that happened that they were part of, being raised in that culture and that society. But still, like that was an example of being raised by the village. There was access to all these multiple adults.
Mhm.
And kids these days don't have it. They're like on their computers, right, on their phones. They can't go out on a bike and just like meet other people. So
Mhm.
that would be classic example.
Mhm.
But then similarly, like, I work quite a bit. Like I have a few people, clients who are, last stage of life, right? Like they're approaching the end.
Mhm.
And the isolation that they're in is incredibly painful. There is no therapy. I mean, of course I help them, but like you can't therapy that away.
Mhm.
Like we die like totally isolated
Mhm.
in this society. It's so heartbreaking, and we're all gonna be there someday. We're all gonna be really old and, not able to care for ourselves and needing supports. And there's no village.
Mhm.
Their adult children are out raising kids alone,
Mhm.
right? Overextended, cannot spend enough time with their aging parents.
Mhm.
And it's like people are spending their last few years in really sad isolation. They can't even afford pets.
Mhm.
They can't even freaking afford a cat
Mhm.
to give them comfort.
Mhm.
That's totally like social trauma,
Mhm.
and one that ultimately befalls all of us. We just don't pay attention to it until we're there. And when we're there, we have no power, right? We can't influence policy and all that.
Mhm.
So but it's painful to see. I mean, the other one is just the kind of activities that are normal to a human animal, right? Like being in nature, like hunting and gathering, relationship with trees, picking stuff off the trees, whatever. Um, Working the land,
Mhm.
relationship with the land, relationship, that like intimate relationship with the natural world. Like that's like part of what our psyche craves naturally. That's our natural habitat. Not staring at Zoom all day, right? I mean, of course, the brain is going to be unhealthy from staring at Zoom all day, being in four walls.
Mhm.
And what would we do when we don't hunt and gather
Mhm.
back in our original habitat? We would dance, right? Like maybe tell stories around the fire to each other. Maybe we paint on walls.
Mhm.
We pray to something bigger than ourselves. And we lost connection with all of that, right? Like who has time? I know people still pray, but like doesn't seem like it's a big part of life anymore. And it's like, who has time to dance around the fire and paint and do things on walls, right? Like, you know what I mean? So all these things that are like part of like what humans naturally do, we don't do them. Instead, like we kind of like sit in front of Zoom and attach ourselves to technology, like you say, and almost become an extension of technology.
Mhm. Wow, it sounds like and it's as you describe some of the past, it sounds pretty wonderful. Some of those
Well, I'm
things.
sure it was freaking horrible, right? Like some, so who was it? Who was it who said
But those,
the prehistoric man's life was difficult, brutish, and short? I think that's how they describe the prehistoric man had a life that was brutish. Yeah, difficult, brutish, and short, something like that. So again, goes back to like we traded like the longevity and ability to overcome diseases to some of these mental health effects
right,
of changes in our environment.
right. Survive maybe for as long as possible, but not necessarily thrive or flourish, right? It's more, and I'm thinking like, as you were describing that, like people are maybe not looking out for each other maybe as much as they used to in terms of the most vulnerable, elderly or children, right? That's like maybe in these community settings or in the villages, there's more looking out for each other, right? If the kid got wandered away, got lost, they were brought back. Now people are afraid for their kid to wander away a bit, right? What might
Right.
happen to their kid? And I just think of my childhood. All of the kids were all out and about in the
Yeah.
street. I grew up in the city, but we were out and we were outdoors like very frequently, and that's where we wanted to be. And we developed relationships and we had fun, and I I feel like that was great. It was a great childhood, and I don't know. I mean, I don't know. Every generation says this about the next one, but you look at kids these days. It's just not as healthy. I just can't. The head buried in the phone, right, or the or on the laptop, or just constantly on, as they call it, social media or whatever else, or even now interacting with AI. It's going to be a tough sell to sell me that that is in any way, shape, or form healthier than being out and about with people in nature or in
100%.
the neighborhood and looking out for each other and not as concerned about accumulating resources or power over others. And I know in history there's all sorts of exceptions, but what you were describing there sounded pretty wonderful, right? And it's like, and even
Yeah.
in families, and I feel like people now, a lot of folks, unfortunately, are as opposed to their children, people like attach themselves to either corporations or governments, right? And like the expression of people, some people get married to the government, right? Rather than a husband, right? And there's this whole thing, oh, it could take, the government will take care of us, and which could
Yeah.
also be a very dangerous slippery
Yeah,
slope.
or get married to a corporation that have been laying off people in droves lately, right?
Yes.
Thousands and thousands and
Yeah.
thousands. Yeah.
I'm just saying what you were describing just sounded so nice, right? Of people like just connecting, looking out for each other, different generations now. But now, yeah, it's gonna be a tough sell. And now like parents are probably looking at their kids and kind of knowing deep down like this isn't really healthy what they're doing. They're indoors too often, right? Or they're isolated. And that's got to be a little depressing to see if the child is not really thriving. And that's what, because every parent wants their kid to have a better life than they had, right? And when that's not clearly visible or society is set up in a more in a different way, that could also be very discouraging and even depressing. Then do you want to have kids, right? Do you want to bring life into this world when it's maybe you're not convinced it's going to be better than what you had, and it's maybe going
Yeah.
down not the brightest path. Anyway,
Well,
but
and
I
that's
can't
why
help
I
but
mean
thinking.
they're right. Like more and more young women decide they don't want children,
Mhm,
right? I mean for like,
mhm,
and it's understandable because society is not set up to support the mother,
mhm, mhm,
you know, or parent. I should say parent because it's not always the mother
mhm,
that does the
mhm.
caregiving.
Yeah.
Um,
Definitely some things to think about. I know we're getting a little short on time soon, but this is definitely a lot of food for thought here. And I mean, there's exceptions, but I feel like you're spot on with a lot of the trends and a lot of where things are different now than they were in the past, right? And is it better? Are we evolving like to living off the land and such, like having healthy, being respectful of nature and sustainability, right? Which maybe we'll cover in a future episode when it comes to
yeah.
sustainability. But now it's just, maybe consumption or maybe the stuff we're putting in our body isn't the healthiest because we're not really connected to nature. We're not really quite sure food is coming from. Is
Yeah.
some people debate whether it's even food or not, some of what we're putting into our bodies, right? And
Yeah.
medicine. So that's why I kind of lean towards being a naturalist more than the technology. I definitely always lean towards that because just also technology doesn't a lot of it doesn't feel right to me. When I'm in front of the laptop too often or on the phone too often, it's like my body speaking. This doesn't feel. I don't feel good, right?
Right. It does. It
It
affects your brain. Like you
yeah.
spend on computer spreadsheets and Zooms. Like, I mean, I'm speaking from personal experience. Like I changed careers, but in my prior day, like that was the life, right? Like all day, it's Zoom screen, spreadsheets, whatever, PowerPoint presentations. Like, yeah, there were like problems with those chemical pathways that you were talking earlier,
Mhm.
right? Like there's actually chemical impact on the brain, and it's not a good one.
Right.
And coming back to kind of some of the points we've made earlier, then the pharmaceutical industry is happy to hand us something in a pill format
Mhm.
that makes it all like feel more tolerable.
Mhm.
But is that a life?
Mhm.
If I'm disconnected from environment and my community and other people, and therefore my soul is like screaming in pain, and you
Mhm.
give me a pill to numb that, I,
Mhm.
you know,
Right. I guess maybe to finish off with the come back to the beginning, where if somebody has trauma and it takes courage to grapple with that and deal with that and maybe make some changes. That sounds very daunting, right? Especially when it's going back many years, the trauma and it's
yeah.
a certain way of living day to day that now needs to change, or you have to let go of, you have to sometimes let go of certain things, or feel like making those changes is not easy, right? In terms of a
No,
day-to-day
it's not. It's not,
lifestyle.
especially the later it is, right? The
That's
harder it
yeah.
is, because then by then your life might be built around certain choices, right? Like, you might have friends and like your immediate environment that like shares the values that you had when you lived out of the scar tissue. Do you
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like, what
Yeah.
happens if your entire social circle are power hungry people?
Right.
Like what do you do if you go change that?
Mm,
And you try to make different choices, you show up different in those relationships, you
mm,
become vulnerable with power hungry people.
mm,
Like what does that do, right? Like you literally have to like find new connections where your healthy patterns will be reinforced and rewarded
mhm.
instead of punished.
Yeah.
Because like not to go off tangents, but like, if you show up, like if you become more healthy, for example, there's certain corporate environments that will spit you right out
Mhm.
because your success in those environments depends on you staying unhealthy.
Mhm.
And I'm gonna say that like very bluntly.
Mhm.
Like that what they reward you for, what they pay you for, the way you evaluate you, that's dependent upon you being pretty damn sick.
Mhm.
So the moment you start acting out of healthier places and not out of scar tissue, you start asking for healthier things, time with your children,
Mhm.
sleep,
Mhm.
God forbid, balance, self-care, whatever, relationships that are like healthier, communication patterns that are healthier in the workplace, respect towards yourself. You start asking for all these things, and there are certain environments, I'm not saying all of them, but there are certain environments that are going to spit you right out.
Mhm.
And so then the path to health demands that you're willing to take that loss.
Mhm. The corporate setting that I heard you describe there sounds a lot different from the village visual from
Well,
earlier. It's a lot that I'm just thinking of that village, which sounded really nice, and now I'm thinking of that corporation, which doesn't sound that nice.
no, and I, you know,
But
I,
I mean, that's very real. I'm in agreement. That's very real. Not every there's exceptions for sure, right? But the very fact that there's a contrast there, and it's and you did
well,
a great job drawing the differences there between the pleasant village versus the unpleasant corporation, which is a very real thing, right?
and I'm going to
Okay.
humor myself real quick because also I don't want to end up with black and white thinking, which by the way, if you're traumatized and you're acting out of trauma, you tend towards black and white thinking. So I don't want to be over here demonstrating black and white thinking because it's not good either.
Right.
I don't want to say all corporates,
All right.
are horrible and all villages were wonderful because
Right.
obviously it's not true
I
either.
know.
And
I was asking for examples. I'd ask for examples of, hey, what's some
yeah,
things that have changed? That's so the context here, you're spot on. It's like not an all or not, but you're answering the question. I think about context. I said my
yeah.
question was, all right, way things used to be, maybe we've changed for the worse in some ways. That Village Corporation is, but like you said, it's not black or white. There's plenty of
Yeah,
companies that do try to take
variation.
care of their employees and treat them well, and
Yeah.
villages that were probably pretty savage, some of them, right?
Some of
So.
them, right? I mean, you read some human history, right? Absolutely. But I think it like all circles back to like the topic, which is what you said, what is the deal with society?
Mhm.
And I think we explored that pretty well, right? Like the relationship between the environments we live in and our mental health and well-being.
Yeah, one final question. And the final question is, what would you say to somebody who knows that they have some monsters under the bed, right? Or they know there's trauma there and they've avoided it, facing it head on. And maybe it's been decades, right? So it's like, I mean, that is daunting as heck, right? And that's going to take a lot of work, not just in terms of thinking about it, but then also like tying in the emotions and then any type of changes that need to be made to get healthier. So that's the last question. What would you say to somebody who, might be facing that and it's going to take some courage to face it? It doesn't sound easy. So what would you say to that person who's on the precipice of doing that work on themselves?
I would ask them to consider the cost of not making the change because it's easy to see the cost of making the change, right? It's easy to say if I, look under the bed and face my monsters, that's going to be uncomfortable. I'm going to be emotionally upset and I'm going to like function less well in my job or whatever, right? Like, and if I make these changes, I might lose my position of power and that's going to cost me a lot, right? The money, the standing, whatever. So it's easy to see the costs of making the change and become afraid. But I would ask somebody to consider the costs of not making the change. So if you have children, then the cost of not making the change is that whatever trauma you're not facing, your children will have to deal with,
Mhm.
right? Whatever it is you're not dealing with, future generations will have to deal with.
Mhm.
So, if you make that choice and you're okay with that, okay, but own that. That you decided not to deal with your traumas and you decided that your kids and their kids are going to have to do that work for you.
Mhm.
You know, if you don't have children, then the cost may very well be your true self.
Mhm.
I mean, that's a more like, I suppose vague concept, and it's to each their own, right? Do you want money and power, or do you want to know who you were meant to be in this world and what you were meant to offer truly, right? I mean, it's kind of that ends up being a spiritual question. Like, what do you want to live for? Um, that I don't know. Like, if somebody says, look, Anna, I don't care what my true self is. I just want to keep my power and, eat in fancy restaurants and have my money and enjoy what I have left, you know, that's a personal decision. But the cost might be, all the gifts that you were born with to bring into this world might be left unmanifested.
Mhm.
That's the cost.
Yeah, maybe that deathbed regret, right? Looking back at those last moments and knowing that lack of self-actualization or lack of becoming one's true self, right? Or as what's the lingo these days, living your truth, right? To
Yeah,
uh to then maybe have not done that or not to that could also be as you said, a cost of looking
right.
back at one's life, or even not necessarily on the deathbed, but in the latter, the very last chapter, looking back, if that person can advise their younger self, what would they say to
What
their
would they
younger
say?
self?
That's a
Right.
really good, yeah, really
Yeah.
good point. It's
Yeah.
ultimately like if you lived your life out of a scar tissue
Mhm.
and you never like made courageous changes, at the end of the day, that life you lived out, is it yours?
Mhm.
Did you live out a life that was your own if you just like lived out of like trauma adaptations?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the cost, so like, yeah, it's very scary, but when I look at it, I think not making a change is scarier.
Yeah. And it's super insightful as always. Thank you. And I would love to have you back for a third time. And I would love to talk a little bit more, maybe at that point about nature and sustainability and the environment and how that ties into mental health and future generations, right? Where we're headed, even logistically, right?
Yes,
And planning wise as a society. But super insightful. Always enjoyed talking to you and riffing a bit.
my pleasure.
That was fun.
Yeah.
And we'd love to have you back again. And oh, shoot, last but not least, if people want to, view your writing or see your art or engage you as a therapist, how would people reach out to you?
AnnaZubets.com. Very easy.
Easy.
There is an art page where you can check out my doodles, and, and then there's a coaching page which connects you to me as a coach. You can find me on Psychology Today, just searching my name as a therapist. I am a new therapist, as I said, so I work under supervision. But
Mhm.
either way, you can reach out to me.
I'm sure you're looking out for your patients. I'm sure you're doing
Yeah,
everything you can to help them. And AnnaZubets.com, that's ANNAZUBETS.com. Yes?
that's right.
All right. All right. Love to have you back. Thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Good to see
Okay.
you.
You too.
Take care.